doesn't surprise me that he would say that we had been producing this report for some time and clearly planned on making it public. You can talk to people. We'd be happy to give you those contacts. The people we talked to at Finance, who were in fact did have a meeting the following week, had asked us for an update that we did provide. They asked for it no later than that Friday. I am confident, and I am very confident, that no one working on this report had any idea about it other than that we were going to produce it and provide all of the information to the public. I think any other assumption is not based on the facts.
Are you willing to make those witnesses available? Or are you going to make us subpoena them so they can come here under oath and testify that, yes, in fact, from mid-April, when the Commissioner knew that Lois Lerner emails were lost, we were planning on telling the Congress as soon as we got all the information. They'll come and testify to that, or will they come and testify, you know what, after the June 9th letter, we decided we better put in the information that we lost Lois Lerner emails?
I don't think you'll find anyone will make that latter testimony.
But my question to you is, are you willing to have those people come testify? Tell us who they are, who the people who worked on this report.
We'd be happy to talk with you about it.
So now you want to...
You've already talked to some of them, and you have others on your schedule.
All right. Gentleman from Nevada is recognized. Mr. Horsford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I do share concerns by some of my colleagues on the other side about why the IRS delayed in providing Congress with notification regarding the unrecoverable emails, because it raises questions. I don't share in the Chairman or other members' conspiracy and rush to judgment about any motives as to why there was a delay. And I feel, again, as I've said in previous meetings, that we failed to get all the facts in order to then make a proper decision. I'm not a defender of the IRS or any other Federal agency. I've said from the beginning that I believe that there was wrongdoing. But the Chairman and others want to conclude or make conclusions about that wrongdoing without justification or evidence to support their assertion. Now, Mr. Chairman, you just read into the record some comments by Mr. Pilger that I had asked to be entered into the record, the full transcripts. So I'm going to ask again for unanimous consent that the transcribed interview opening statements of DOJ officials Richard Pilger and Jack Smith be allowed to be entered into the record, particularly since you just handpicked certain statements, and I'm requesting the full transcript be entered. Will the Chairman please provide that courtesy for this to be entered into the record under unanimous consent?
If the gentleman would yield for just a second, if I read from the opening statement that Mr.
That's what this is.
If you're just asking for the opening statement, not the full questions from Democrat staff, Republican staff, but just the opening statement from Mr. Pilger and Mr. Smith, we'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
All right.
I also want to follow up to some of the claims that have been made by my Republican colleagues and give you an opportunity to respond. It has now been stated twice today that Mr. Kane testified during his July 17th interview that in mid-February 2014, the IRS realized that Lois Lerner's emails would not be recoverable. I want to clarify here, because I don't want Mr. Kane's statements to be taken out of context. It is true that Mr. Kane told us that he had discovered that Ms. Lerner's hard drive had crashed and that the contents of the hard drive were unrecoverable. However, that does not mean that Mr. Kane said that he thought in February of 2014 that the IRS would never be able to produce those emails to Congress. In fact, Mr. Kane was asked, quote, "And as of March 2014, you were not aware that the IRS would be unable to recover all of Ms. Lerner's documents." And he answered, quote, That's correct. He further explained, as you have, that the IRS was engaged in an extensive process to find Ms. Lerner's emails from other sources at the IRS. And in fact, those efforts were successful and yielded the production of an additional 24,000 Lois Lerner emails. Is that correct, Mr. Koskin?
That is correct.
Mr. Kane also explained that the IRS's goal with respect to the document productions to Congress was to fully comply with those requests as expeditiously as possible. He stated with respect to fulfilling that goal, and I quote, "I have tried my best, and everyone that I work with have tried their best." Commissioner Koskin, do you share that belief that every effort was made to provide this committee and others with those emails that you were able to recover?
I do.
And beyond the issue of failing to notify us in a timely manner, then the question becomes, what can be made of why that timeline was delayed?
Right. And as I've said, first of all of the emails in question had been provided in the normal course to this committee and the other investigators. So there was no attempt to not produce information that showed that, in fact, there had been a problem with Lois Lerner's hard drive. In fact, none of us, IRS or investigators, noted that in the fall productions there were emails from Lois Lerner saying she had had problems with her hard drive and had lost emails. But everybody then appropriately was looking at subject matter. But it's not as if any of these emails were withheld or not produced in a regular manner. So that as we were working in April and May, pulling all the information together, trying to determine how many emails we actually had, we were producing emails as a regular matter, and the emails that were the basis of our June 13 report had all been provided previously to all of the investigators.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The Chair now recognizes the Chairman of the committee, Mr. Issa.
Thank you. Commissioner, I really wish we had your IT guys here instead, because it is inherently a little hard when we're asking you so many questions that are not related directly to your past experience. But I appreciate your continuing to volunteer to come up. Hopefully, as we interview some of your IT professionals and others involved, it will make it easier to direct questions. But a lot has been done to talk about this, a drive this large that apparently went so bad that not a single piece of information could be saved. And you've asked us to believe that your very special experts couldn't save one piece of data from this drive, or one just like it, correct?
That's what I was advised, yes. And that's what the email strain that we produced and I testified about at previous hearings says.
The American people don't believe that. You realize that it's the idea that we can recover the last 17 or 18 seconds from Challenger exploding above our atmosphere, falling to the sea, and being left under the sea for a year, that we could recover the voice from that, makes people wonder why a product that simply came in and out of the office with Lois Lerner every day, suddenly not one piece of data could be recovered. Doesn't surprise you. The American people just have a hard time believing that, does it?
Well, I don't know whether the American people broadly view that, but I do understand that when our Criminal Investigation Division, which are experts at extracting information, say they could not recover any emails, right, that seems probative on the one hand, but on the other hand, I could understand people saying, well, if you kept trying.
But do you think it's reasonable for us to check with your criminal investigation people, interview people involved to see if that passes the reality check in spite of what the American people may think or the doubts they may have? Do you think it's fair for us to check into that?
Yes, and in fact, those interviews are being scheduled. Have some of them, I gather, from the press release I saw from Ways and Means, that some of those IT people have already been interviewed.
So it's fair for us to do an interview and to investigate on our own in order to bring the credibility that we bring as, if you will, a doubting Thomas to the process. You'd agree with that?
Yes, I've never had any concern and objection to the oversight. As I said, spent 4 years in the Senate. Senator Rivercroft was on the Government of Operations Oversight Operations, chaired that committee. I'm a big believer in congressional oversight.
And I appreciate that you are. One of the things we discovered that was not made available to us early on was the existence of what's called OCS, this chat capability that exists within the IRS's network. Is that right?
That's correct. I spent some time testifying a couple of weeks ago about that.
Right. And you wrote me back a letter when I asked about it. And in the letter, it said basically that no records were kept because it was the equivalent of visits or phone calls. Do you remember that in the letter?
Yes.
Now, would it surprise you to know that we disagree with you, that in fact it is the opinion of this committee that the Federal Records Act, unless you can train and guarantee that no policy decisions, none of the kinds of activities we are discovering in email could be done on OCS, that in fact you should turn on that switch and you should collect and you should retain OCS chat unless you can assure us that it's not doing the equivalent. And I'll be brief, but I'll explain something to you. Years ago, when I was a subcommittee chairman and President Bush was in office, we investigated the Mineral Management Service. And what we discovered there was that they had systematically signed leases that were simply wrong and cost the American people billions of dollars. And we could find not a shred of evidence in emails to show the absurdity of how this came to pass. So after we deposed people repeatedly, we finally discovered that they all admitted that only the cover sheet was brought to them, that they signed or initialed and they never read the leases, so that one mistake was passed through multiple signatures. But more importantly, as we went through the process, what we discovered was at Mineral Management Service, a now defunct and disgraced organization to a certain extent after the BP disaster, they had a policy of what they called talking over the transom. Lawyers made no memos for the record. Lawyers went out of their way to have no paper trail of things they did in their consultation. I will tell you today that has to end, that the American people expect that the Federal Records Act, the Presidential Records Act, is not something to be avoided, and you should not be trying or allowing the bypassing of future oversight that you said rightfully so with your experience you believe in. Maintaining data so that it can be analyzed by your Inspector General, who is conducting your primary investigation, you have full confidence in, activities going on in the Ways and Means, which are slightly different than ours, our activities, or anything in the Senate, are hampered by policies of any part of government that allow the use of something that clearly bypasses future oversight. So I hope today that in addition to your willingness to cooperate and help us in getting to the answers I mentioned on this, that you will recognize that your letter is not acceptable, that email is a substitute not just for the old-fashioned letter, but it's a substitute for a visit. It's a substitute for a phone call, and that in fact the reason that those are important is that the phone call and the visit, in the old days you would have done a memo for the record if in fact you wanted to do your job. That isn't being done. Emails and these chats are extremely important, and I'd like to have a second round at some time, but I would yield back at this time.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of information. Yesterday, Chairman Issa informed committee members that he will be holding yet another hearing on this topic next Wednesday. We have the notice. Could the Chairman please inform us who will be testifying at that hearing on Wednesday?
Pursuant to the rules, we'll inform at the appropriate time, but at this time they haven't sent anything out, and I appreciate your inquiry.
So you don't know, or you won't tell us?
I think we'll
regular order, please.
We'll do regular order, and the chair at this point will now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bentivolio, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, if any of my constituents were not as forthcoming as the IRS, there would be a presumption of guilt. They would be fined, and/or have their wages garnished and/or liens laid on their home and/or savings accounts seized. When I go back to the district, I had the opportunity to talk to many IRS former employees of the IRS, now retired, and I asked them what they thought of what was going on at the IRS, and I heard despicable behavior every step of the way. The IRS, no longer credible. I think at this point, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yield to the gentleman from California.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And in regular order, this is helpful not to need a second round. Commissioner, there's been approximately a year of production of emails. In your earlier hearing, I remember it might take 2 years, sort of an estimate. But let me ask you a question. Have you reviewed the timeline when this committee issued lawful demands for lowest learners' emails? Have you reviewed the timeline of who did what and when?
No.
Would you be prepared to deliver to us a timeline, meaning calendars, activities of individuals who were charged with going out and finding those emails, what they did and when they did it?
As I say, we've had over approximately 250 people doing that work.
Well, no, actually you've had people redacting and you've had people legally reviewing. I'm only talking about who went and got the information, the emails, who accumulated them, the gathering.
Yes, that's not just 1 or 2 people. That's a set of people. But we'd be happy to provide you the information in any form that would be usable.
Well, here's the inquiry I'll ask you today. And again, you know, we appreciate your coming, but you're not the IT guy. You're not any of the 200 people per se. It is clear now from this side of the dais that we issued requests and subpoenas. 2 things were to occur. One, that the moment we issued our first letter, it required that you preserve information. There's a question about whether that was preserved, because in order to preserve it, you'd have to go look for it. So the tapes that now your own people have admitted, they're not sure whether they exist or not. They've undercut your claim that you're very comfortable that they were gone at the end of 6 months. That means that nobody went out to say, where are the tapes, what are the tapes, are there any? Additionally, in order to not know that Lois Lerner had this gap, either you weren't looking extensively all at once, or, and this is one of my concerns, people just didn't want to admit that they weren't going out and looking for emails by essentially what we expected, which was to do a keyword search on a server and deliver the data. Remember that for months, even before you came on board, we were being told, you know, well, here's some keywords and we want to search on these keywords. And the IRS was adding keywords that allowed them to deliver the false narrative that progressives were being targeted. They were adding self-serving words and they were searching them. This committee had a reasonable expectation that you were searching the entire database. You were searching not 6 months worth of emails, not 6,000 emails or less that had been preserved, but you were searching the historic emails. Not until recently, the last 6 weeks, did we understand that if that was how you were getting all of your information, you were knowingly looking at a small fraction of the historic 2 or 3 year email selections. We now understand no more than 6,000 emails, only 6 months of record. So it is now appropriate for us to understand your employees' search techniques, what they did, because at some point they must have started searching, okay, who has PSTs? Send us your PSTs. Or did they, and this is why we have to ask directly, did they send out one of these, do you have any information relevant and please send it to us? Because the keyword search would imply that in fact they were accumulating all these PSTs, these downloaded local files, and then searching them. If in fact that process didn't begin in earnest in the first week or month, if in fact your predecessor was delivering selected data from what was basically the last 6 months of things still preserved, we need to know that. Because it does appear as though in this long investigation, there has been either an absence of a willingness to disclose problems or an absence of real fact-finding, getting these emails quickly, or deliberate obstruction. We don't know which, and we would like to know, as I said in the beginning of this, who went looking for what when. Not interested in who read them, not interested in who edited them, who redacted them, or who released them. And that information would be equally valuable whether it was pursuant to the House or Senate's request or to Ways and Means or this committee's request. But giving us that gives us a timeline of who was involved in going and looking so we know who knew that, in fact, something like Lois Lerner's personal email on her personal hard drive was of any relevance, because this committee didn't know that there was a lack of a central database for the first almost a year of this investigation. I thank the Chairman and yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no doubt, Mr. Koskinen, that morale at the IRS is low. I want to tell you about morale in Wyoming. The people of Wyoming who I work for all feel targeted. They think the IRS is out to get them. They are lower than a snake's belly about the IRS because they know that Lois Lerner was brought into the IRS from the Federal Elections Commission, where she had a history of political targeting, political bias. They know that she was tapped to enforce the largest tax increase in history, Obamacare, after she targeted conservative groups while overseeing 501c4s, tax-exempt organizations. They saw her come to this committee and say, I've broken no laws, and then take the fifth. They know that we subsequently found out that she did break a law, that she provided confidential taxpayer information to another federal agency, which is against the law. And they know that so far she's gotten away with that the Justice Department isn't doing anything about it, and that she got away scot-free. They know that when they get letters from the IRS, that they're being targeted. I have a constituent who got a letter and an investigation from the IRS that has cost her $50,000 just to close her estate, because they keep asking her, what make and model is your bed? Your bed? They think her bed is some expensive antique. Incidentally, she is a very active member of the Republican Party. She feels targeted. Morale is low in Wyoming because our government has turned against us. So this is a legitimate investigation. I hope it continues at length. I hope it goes on until we get to the truth, because the people we work for feel like the government is getting away with their tax dollars that they don't know. They feel like the government is denying them tax-exempt status that they deserve. They feel like they can't trust the IRS. That's why this investigation. That's why you're here and ask the same questions over and over. I'm sure it's frustrating. We're frustrated too. But it's because our constituents are mortified and scared and are going to take matters into their own hands because they don't feel we have the ability to do it ourselves. So, with no apologies for the morale at the IRS, and no apologies for how many times we're asking you the same questions over and over, Mr. Chairman, while I thank you for your attendance, I do yield back the balance of my time.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I will.
Some people just don't have enough questions for you, Commissioner. I mentioned the timeline and my interest in that. Let me just ask you one other question, which is, when you look at this investigation and you look at the fact that a Federal judge is now ordering you to show certain things, you look at your IG's investigation, you look at our investigation, are you aware and do you recognize that the three separate channels are perceived and in reality are very different as to what your responsibilities are and how you approach them?
My response to all of them is the same. If people have, from any branch government, questions, we have an obligation to respond to them in response to—
Well, I appreciate that, but the IG does, in fact, work under you. He has limited authority.
Absolutely not.
I understand his independence, but in fact—
he works for he's the Treasury Department IG. Right. We have no control, influence over him. He doesn't work in the IRS.
But in fact, he has testified that when he wants information, he has to ask for it, and he may not always get it. That in fact, there's a process, and sometimes it's very frustrating for him to get information, even though you say he's independent. He doesn't have the authority to demand things and automatically get them. Isn't that true?
I've never had, in my time here or other places, an experience with an IG not able to get the information he needs, and I am committed, as Mr. George knows, that whatever information he wants in any investigation, he's welcome to have.
Well, we'll certainly hold you to that. Thank you.
I'm happy to be here.
Yield back.
Thank the Chairman. For the other members who do want to do a second round, we will do that. And so I'll kick it off and recognize myself. And I just want to reiterate, people have mentioned the morale. And granted, a lot of the things that happened were before you were there. But I do think it's worth mentioning that there are a lot of taxpayers who have had their morale hit. When they see some of the conference spending that's gone on, $50,000 for a Star Trek parody video and other lavish expenses on their dime. And again, that was before you were there, but that really irks a lot of folks and certainly our constituents. And I think the same goes for the targeting when people feel like they were being targeted or in fact were targeted simply from exercising their constitutional rights. I think that hurts their morale too. And so I just think it's important that we mention that. Now, a lot has been going on about when you knew there was a problem, why you delayed telling Congress, and I think it is the case that the standard that would be applied to an official such as yourself is not simply what you actually knew, but what you should have known. In other words, you can't bury your head in the sand and not be apprised of what people in your organization know. And so I think that's going to be a question is, clearly, there were people at the senior leadership level in the IRS early February, mid-February, who knew that the problems were more substantial than what you indicated to us that you personally knew. So the question is going to be, why did you not know more? And I think that goes into what I and some other folks have raised, and I know my friend Mr. Cartwright disputed the notion that this is being investigated by the Justice Department. And just so we're clear, because I don't want to be lobbying charges that aren't true, here's the transcript from last week's hearing with James Cole, DOJ Deputy AG. Chairman Jordan, the fact that the Commissioner, meaning you, at the Internal Revenue Service delayed telling Congress, the American people, the FBI, and the Justice Department is a matter that you are going to investigate. Mr. Cole replied, we are going to look into what the circumstances were around that, yes. And so we're concerned about it, and the DOJ seems also to be concerned about it, and I think that that's important to know. Let me ask you this. You mentioned that you have seen the Ways and Means press release about their conducting interviews with different IRS technical witnesses about what in fact happened to the hard drive. And so they told Ways and Means that the hard drive was scratched and that data was likely recoverable from it. And of course, the IRS just last week in federal court has filed a declaration saying consistent with what I think what you've testified to, that the hard drive was destroyed and, in fact, no data was recoverable for it. So my question is, what's an American to think when they see some witnesses telling a congressional committee scratched may be recoverable, but yet the IRS is representing in Federal court that it was destroyed and completely unrecoverable?
I wasn't there, and I haven't talked to those people, and I don't know what that interview yesterday
But they would, the technical people would be the ones that we would most want to talk to about that, correct?
All I know is the emails that I've testified at a couple previous hearings about show that there were efforts made by Ms. Lerner and the IT department to restore the hard drive. It went to the Criminal Investigation Division and their experts, and they said they were not able to retrieve information from that hard drive. That's all I know. That's what the emails contemporaneously at the time showed and said, was that they had tried, the experts in the IRS had tried, they were unable to recover any information.
Okay. So, and I read the pleadings, and I take that point, but we are getting conflicting information, it seems, in the Congress at this point. So I think it's going to be important that that be resolved, because clearly you can't be telling the court one thing and then having people in the organization who are on the ground and maybe had intimate knowledge telling the Congress the other thing. I'm almost out of time, but just very quickly, switching gears a little bit, the D.C. Circuit issued an opinion about the IRS's regulation as respects to Obamacare subsidies, taxes, and mandates in the states that have exchanges not run by a state but run by the Federal Government. Given that right now there's a circuit split where you have the Fourth Circuit saying that basically it was either a close call or a Scrivener's error, you have the D.C. Circuit saying actually the IRS didn't have the authority to issue that ruling, are you going to rescind that rule until this can be resolved by the Supreme Court, or what's the IRS's position in light of the Halbig case?
The rule about the granting of advanced premium tax credit all is run by HHS. We have our regulation said that, in fact, it was appropriate and acceptable to go through the court, through the Federal marketplace. We have no plans until the issue is resolved in court to rescind or change that rule or change our preparation for the next filing season.
And is it your position as the IRS that you've construed that to be that there may have been a drafting error in the statute, but the intent of Congress was that the subsidy should go, and is that why the IRS has taken the position that they've taken?
I'm supportive of the Justice Department opinion, which was upheld in the Fourth Circuit, not upheld in the D.C. Circuit. I don't have a different view of the legality. I think the Justice Department puts it very well, that they think the statute is enforceable and the regulations are appropriate.
Okay. I am out of time, and I will now yield to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On July 9th, you appeared before the Subcommittee on Government Operations for a hearing entitled Solutions to Close the $106 billion Improper Payments Gap. Even though it was clearly not the stated purpose of the hearing, Republican members of the committee asked you a number of questions regarding the committee's investigation into the IRS treatment of applications for tax-exempt status. At the hearing, Chairman Issa also released emails from Lois Lerner regarding the IRS instant messaging system called OCS that he claims prove that Ms. Lerner, quote, intentionally sought to hide information from Congress, end of quote. Despite your testimony that you were unfamiliar with the system and would be happy to look into its use, Republican members repeatedly questioned you about the specifics of OCS. Commissioner, now that you have learned of the system, can you describe what OCS is?
Yes. OCS, I actually provided a letter to the committee that Chairman Issa referenced earlier. What I've been advised is OCS is a system that exists in Microsoft systems, and it basically allows people around the country, its primary use is to have a teleconference, and you can put the same information up on the screen, and everybody looks at it at the same time, and it's a way to have a telecommunications gathering and a meeting. It allows you also to, in effect, have an instant messaging capacity. If for those who use it, not everybody uses it. I don't use it because I didn't know it existed. That much like your cell phone, somebody, if they see you're online, can send you a text message, and it's like calling you on the phone. So like all text messages, it's a sometimes faster or more efficient way to communicate than picking up the phone and calling someone.
Despite the fact that the email exchange occurred on April 9th, 2013, nearly 2 years after Ms. Lerner's computer crashed, and more than 1 year after the Inspector General's audit began, Chairman Issa declared that the email exchange was a, quote, smoking gun. On July 11th, the IRS sent a letter to the committee explaining that OCS messages, quotes, are substitutes for telephone calls and in-person meetings, end of quote. And, quote, the IRS does not currently preserve communications sent and received through OCS, end of quote. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
The IRS further explained that the Federal Records Act, and I quote, does not require recording or retention of telephone calls or meetings as a substitute for telephone calls and in-person meetings that would not normally be recorded. Communications sent through OCS are not considered records subject to Federal records or other retention requirements, end of quote. I ask unanimous consent that the letter be entered into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Commissioner Caution, does the Federal Records Act require retention of the OCS messages?
It's my understanding it does not, and in fact, it's my understanding that NARA reviewed our record-keeping process, and in 2011 we got a score of 93, and in 2012 got a score of 99. But we are meeting with NARA. We've reached out to them to try to work with them to ensure, A, that we are complying with the Act now, and if there are ways we can improve our official records keeping, we're very anxious to do that. As I say, ultimately, we hope someday to be able to afford to have, in effect, an email system that's a system of record.
Are you aware of any evidence that Lois Lerner used the OCS system to intentionally hide information from Congress or the Inspector General?
I am not. As noted, we produced 43,000 emails from her account, so she obviously used email significantly.
To the best of your knowledge, has any IRS employee used OCS system to intentionally hide communications from Congress or the Inspector General?
I have no knowledge of any such activity.
Once again, your testimony is corroborated by the results of the committee's investigation. After receiving hundreds of thousands of pages of documents and interviewing dozens of IRS employees, the committee has not identified any evidence supporting the Chairman's allegation that Ms. Lerner or any other IRS employee used the OCS system to intentionally hide information from Congress. I want to thank you, Ms. Caution, for your testimony. I have 14 seconds left. Is there anything else you wanted to tell us?
No, I would just add to the Congresswoman from Wyoming that talking about she works for taxpayers. My view is we all work for taxpayers. I am, as the head of the agency, basically ultimately employed by the American people. We have important responsibilities to be careful stewards of the money we spend. It is ultimately money comes from the American people. And we have an obligation to ensure that everyone is treated fairly and the same. And to the extent that there are people who have lost trust and confidence in the IRS to do that, one of our major challenges is to restore that trust. Whenever we are going to continue to contact and audit people, as I've said in the past, some of them will be Democrats, some will be Republicans, some may not belong to a party, some may have voted for one person or another, some may be active in politics. And what they need to be confident of is when they hear from the IRS, it's not because of any of that, it's all irrelevant. When they hear from us, it's because of some question in their tax return. And if somebody else had that same question, they'd get be heard from us as well, that we have an obligation and a commitment to treat everybody fairly and evenly across the board. I have met with over 11,000 IRS employees across the country, and I have never seen a more dedicated workforce dedicated to the mission of the IRS, to providing taxpayer service, to enforcing the Internal Revenue Code. And I'm delighted to be part of that workforce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I recognize the Chairman of the subcommittee, I just will, with respect to Lois Lerner's emails in terms of OCS, when she initially wrote the email to Maria Hook saying she had a question about OCS, she said she was cautioning folks about email, and now we've had several occasions where Congress has asked for emails, and there have been an electronic search for responsive emails. So we need to be cautious about what we say in emails. Someone asked if OCS conversations were also searchable. I didn't know but told them I would get back to them. And so I just think it's important. The context when she was asking about OCS was to try to evade congressional oversight. And with that, I will recognize the Chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me go to the Hallebeck decision, Mr. Koskinen. Does the IRS have an obligation to now tell taxpayers the tax credit may, in fact, not be available?
We actually I think we have an obligation to keep taxpayers informed about all aspects of the Affordable Care Act, all aspects of the Internal Revenue Code. We have a program of public information to advise taxpayers now if they're getting premium tax credits before these decisions. If their information changes, they should go back and make sure the credit is correct. To the extent that we go forward,
are you going to educate taxpayers on the potential ramifications of the Hallebeck decision?
We are actually will put out information regarding it. As I say, right now at this point, 2 courts have come to different conclusions, and so we don't intend to make any difference changes. And therefore, I think our advice, although it's not totally in my control, because it's a policy issue of how to deal with it, and we're just tax administration. But my general assumption is people will and should continue to operate as they have thus far until we get to a final court decision. And the courts have not indicated that anyone should do anything differently.
Let me go to the Ways and Means statement yesterday, their press statement. One of the things they say in the lead paragraph is, it says, in-house professionals at the IRS recommended the agency seek outside assistance in recovering the data. Are you going to do that? Or have you done that already? Outside professionals to recover data lost or maybe that may be recoverable on the scratched hard drive or the tape that now, in fact, may be available? Is that something the IRS is going to do?
As you know, my understanding is that that hard drive is a normal process. Once the Criminal Investigation Division determined they could not restore any information from it, that hard drive was recycled and no longer exists.
Did they advise? When that took place, when you were trying to get to the data, did you, in fact, go get outside assistance in trying to recover the data?
I was not around at that time, but I am not aware of any attempt to go outside the IRS.
So even though in-house professional says, you know what, this might be a little above our pay scale, we should go get the outside tech experts, the super whiz kids who can do this stuff, we should bring them in. To your knowledge, that was not done?
To my knowledge, I don't know even about that statement. I haven't seen his transcript as to whether that, I was not aware that that recommendation has been made, but I have no information indicating that that was done, i.e. that outside experts were sought. All I've seen is the emails that I actually have testified about in which Criminal Investigation Division reported they could not restore the hard drive. But I have no information that we did, the IRS at that time did anything else.
They did not. I just want to be clear. It's your understanding that there was not outside professionals who were brought in to try to recover the data?
That's right. I have no indication that was done, and it's my assumption by the emails that I saw when I testified that when the criminal investigation...
So no outside experts were brought in, even though in-house experts recommended they be brought in?
I had no information about the in-house recommendation.
I'm going to what the Ways and Means Committee is reporting, that they said in-house professionals said, in fact, we should go get some outside experts. This is beyond our scope. We need someone else to come get this because this is such important information. And you're saying you don't think that was done?
I don't think it was done, but I haven't seen the full context of what that gentleman said either.
Okay. You don't think it was done, and you don't know if it was asked for. They're reporting that it was asked for, and
it wasn't done.
And wasn't done, which is a problem, which is a big problem when your tech experts say we need outside tech experts to come in and get the data. No, we don't want to do that. It's unrecoverable. That was as reported by what you've said in testimony and what's been filed at the court that is unrecoverable.
You have to remember this was 3 years ago, and there were no investigations ongoing at that time. And in fact, the IRS had already taken extraordinary attempts even to go to the CID
But that's the point. If it's 3 years ago, that's why they said we need the outside experts. That's why they wanted the help. And you're saying it didn't happen, which is a concern. Let me just do one other question, if I could. So according to your testimony a month ago, the Ways and Means Committee, you said the IRS in February identified documents that indicated Ms. Lerner had experienced a computer failure in 2011, consistent with Mr. Kane. You knew in February there was a problem. February 2nd, February 4th, you knew there was a big problem. According to Mr. Kane's testimony, in mid-February, you knew it was unrecoverable. Your testimony says, in mid-March 2014, this review, we learned the data stored on her computer hard drive was determined to be unrecoverable. So Mr. Kane says he knew in February, you knew in mid-March.
That's right. I
But you were kept abreast.
I actually knew in mid-April, and that's a misstatement on my part. If you read my testimony before this committee and the now 3 hearings I've had.
So what you said, this is your written testimony in Ways and Means. Is it not accurate?
My written testimony?
This is what you had. This was your opening statement and what you said to the Ways and Means Committee. The IRS in February identified documents that indicate Ms. Lerner experienced a computer failure in 2011. Mid-March review 2014, the data stored on her computer hard drive was determined to be unrecoverable.
No, I'm sorry. That's correct. I didn't. That was what the IRS knew.
Here's my question.
Yes.
Mr. Kane says on February 4th he knew. You indicate in your testimony in mid-February we knew there were big problems, and you indicate in mid-March we knew it was unrecoverable. You knew, even though your key staff people, Mr. Kane and Ms. Duvall, knew in mid-February. You testified February 5th to the House Ways and Means Committee, February 26th to the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Financial Services, March 26th to this full committee, and April 8th to the Senate Finance Committee. In those hearings, you were asked about Ms. Lerner and email and different things. You had 4 different opportunities in front of Congress. So I'm wondering, in the back of your mind, were you wondering when you answered these questions that we're going to produce all of Lois Lerner emails? When we're going to comply? In the back of your mind, were you thinking, maybe I should let these guys in on the little kind of important fact that, you know what, we've already determined that her hard drive is unrecoverable? Was that ever in the back of your mind when you're answering questions from members of Congress in 4 different committees over the time period when you've already learned significant facts, even though in your mind, as put in your testimony, you didn't fully know that we'd lost them all for good, even though you sort of knew that it was pretty darn likely you'd lost them all for good, in the back of your mind, did you think, you know what, maybe I should fully disclose what the real status is of Ms. Lerner's emails?
No. As I've testified several times in the past.
That didn't enter your mind at all?
I didn't know that there were emails lost. I personally didn't know, and that's what I was testifying about until the middle of April. When I testified, and I've said this before in several hearings, when I testified on March 26, I did not know that her emails were not recoverable.
But this is your testimony. Right here, I'm reading, this is John Koskinen testimony. In the mid-March 2014 timeframe, we learned the data stored on her computer hard drive was determined to be unrecoverable. So that's certainly before the March 26th hearing and the April 8th hearing in front of the Senate Finance Committee. So you had 2 opportunities where you already know it's unrecoverable. That means you're not going to get what's there.
No, I'm sorry. As I say, I go to the point earlier. I take responsibility for the agency. When I said in that trying to report to people what we knew, that's what the IRS knew. When you ask me specifically what did I know, I knew and didn't know until April, even though if you told me now that Tom Kane said he knew in February, I would henceforth say we as the IRS knew in February. I myself personally did not know.
So when you're,
when I testify, I tell you what I know.
This goes right to the Chairman's point. When your chief counsel knows in February, mid-February, that it's unrecoverable, you can't come in front of Congress and say, I didn't know, that's why I didn't answer it. Your chief counsel knows. You should have known, and you should have disclosed that, and you didn't.
I didn't know, and I didn't, and therefore couldn't disclose, and you're exactly right. I have not hidden behind the fact that somehow this is somebody else's responsibility. I am perfectly prepared to take full responsibility for exactly what we did with the production of the information to the Congress.
But you didn't tell us that in your testimony. You didn't tell us, you know what, in March 26th when you were answering these, you didn't tell us that. It would have been nice if we'd have known at that point, Kate Duvall and Tom Kane already knew it was unrecoverable, but somehow they didn't tell you because you'd have to disclose that when asked about it in Congress? Was that why they didn't tell you?
I have no idea. This was an iterative process. At that point, we were spending most of our time trying to produce all of the information for the determination process, which we were able to do by the middle of March.
See, this is what no one can figure out. Something this important. Lois Lerner, the lady who sat in your chair and took the fifth, the central figure in this investigation, you lose her emails. Your chief counsel knows in February. The lawyer in charge of document production knows in February. And they don't tell you, and you can come in front of Congress 4 times and not disclose that. And then when you do learn in April, you can wait until June 13th to tell. That is what the American people are like, no wonder there's a morale concern, and no wonder there's a distrust. That is unbelievable.
Well, can I just add one point? And you have to talk
we didn't know your chief counsel knew.
You're going to talk to the chief counsel, and she'll tell you what she knew or didn't know.
We already talked to Tom Kane, and he told us she knew.
Right. He knew that, as you go back through there, that the hard drive had a significant problem. We did not know what emails we had. We, in fact, discovered and found 24,000 additional emails from Lois Lerner to other people as we went forward.
And I appreciate the Chairman's indulgence. All I'm saying is this. When Tom Kane, the lawyer in charge of document production, the professional who you said does good work at the IRS, when he says unrecoverable, and they knew that in mid-February, and you come to Congress 3 times after they knew that, both he and your chief counselor, and you don't disclose that, you should have known that and you should have told us. And then when you do find out, you wait 2 more months? Come on. Come on, we're supposed to buy that? I yield back.
I thank the Chairman. And I would point out, before I recognize my friend from Pennsylvania, is here we are in, say, February, March, saying you didn't know how many Lerner emails were out there. And granted, you were not Commissioner during this whole time, but we've been asking for these things for over a year now. Subpoena was sent in August, reissued under your watch. And so the IRS dragged its feet on that, and I realize a lot of that is not necessarily on your watch, but don't tell me 9, 10 months after we request this stuff and 5 or 6 months after their subpoena is issued that somehow you just don't know how many emails you have. That should have been something that should have been ascertainable. Thank you for the indulgence, and I will recognize Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Pro Tem. Speaking of things that would be nice to know and things not disclosed, Mr. Koskinen, I asked the Chairman of this full committee who the witnesses are supposed to be next Wednesday from the IRS. He declined to tell me. He declined to tell me whether he even knew who the witnesses next week will be. But I didn't ask you, Mr. Koskinen. This is your department. Do you know, have you been informed by anybody on this committee who the witnesses sought for next week's hearing will be?
Until I came to this committee meeting, I had no idea that the committee was going to hold yet another hearing next week.
And would you agree with me that those are among the things that would be nice to know?
It's always nice to know in advance when we're supposed to show up for a hearing. I don't know whether I'm expected to show up again next Wednesday.
Well, neither do I. Well, let's delve into the IRS forensic lab together, shall we? There were comments today about scratches on hard drives, and that's not my area of expertise, and I dare say it's not yours either. But we did have John Minsick, an analyst from the IRS Criminal Investigations Unit, meet with Ways and Means staff on Monday. He told them he did not find anything suspicious about how a scratch got on Ms. Lerner's hard drive. The analyst, Mr. Minsick, said that he tried to recover Ms. Lerner's documents on 2 occasions, first with a normal tool set, and then using more advanced tools. He still couldn't recover any data. Mr. Commissioner, contemporaneous emails confirm that the IRS Criminal Investigations Unit could not recover her documents. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
And the CI analyst, Mr. Minsick, then told Ways and Means Committee staff that he gave his colleague in the IRS IT shop the name of a third-party vendor that he used on rare occasions to recover information, but IRS IT staff had already consulted with outside experts at HP. Mr. Koskinen, do you know if IRS officials consulted with IT experts a second time in 2011 to recover Ms. Lerner's emails?
I do not know.
Okay. All right. And finally, I want to touch on something that the gentlelady from Wyoming mentioned. She just said that her constituents are going to take matters into their own hands. I say this because about an hour ago, somebody walked into the Cannon House Office building with a handgun, according to Chad Peregrine, our friend from Fox News locally. Knowing that there are over 4,000 staffers and interns at risk here on the House side of the Capitol, and recalling the horrible Gabby Giffords tragedy and the loss of staffer Gabriel Zimmerman, I would ask that members refrain from making statements that could even possibly be misconstrued by the public as an invitation to do anything like that. It's obvious that Representative Lummis meant no such thing, but I think it behooves all of us to be very careful about the way we phrase things, because there are people out there ready and able to misconstrue things. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Ms. Koskin, here we go again. I told a story last time, and it was the story of my young son who, to some media reports, became famous, I guess, or infamous, however you want to describe it, on the stories that he used to tell, and I recounted this timeline, and it just, I wish I could sit here today and see you again and say that what was not plausible then has now gotten a little more plausible, and it just seems to not have gotten any more plausible. We still continue, and people ask, why are we continuing to do this? Because it just looks like, there's something new comes out all the time. One request will say this, there's another request, and it was asked earlier, I had to leave and come back, and it said, how much, paperwork that you've put to the committee, and how many hours are being worked on. To restore trust in a relationship, whether it is between two people or whether it's between government and the people that they serve, it should really be of no limit to restore that trust, especially with the IRS. So, frankly, to tell me that you gave 1 million documents and that your hours are spending on, because of the issues that have been raised and the lack of trust on both sides, I have Democrats and Republicans in my district who are appalled at this. And they want it solved. They want the real answers, and they want to continue, and they don't want to keep reading every week in the paper that something new's come up. I think that is an issue of trust that has to be maintained here. And frankly, the plausibility story is just, again, getting to the level of unbelievable in a lot of ways. But I do have some questions, because we've talked about the Lois Lerner emails. But in addition to those, the committee has also asked for other emails, and I want to talk to you about those for just a second to see the status of those subpoenas. Is that okay? Sure. Okay. Holly Paz emails responsive to the committee's request from August 2nd, 2013 to February 14th, 2014. Have you gathered all of those emails?
We've provided all of the emails with regard to the determination process. And again, pursuant to what I thought were agreed upon search terms, but apparently not totally agreed, with the investigative committees, that we would select 83 custodians who were the ones most likely to be involved, and that we would search. Which
are those the same 83 that a quarter of them's hard drives crashed?
Well, it's not clear a quarter. There's at this point nobody knows what that answer is. But
so we could have more that have crashed.
We could have more. We could have less. I don't know until we find out.
Does that just not boggle the mind that of a small number, about a quarter, and we can argue back and forth, a quarter, not a quarter, I'm not a mathematician, neither are you, but that there may be others in that subset that deals with the areas we're asking for?
Yes, and that's a perfect example as to why it would be very helpful had we been able to complete the investigation of what happened to the custodians. We could tell you. The reason I actually decided we would continue to find out how many Lois Lerner emails we had was because if we hadn't been able to do that, people would be talking about there are
But let's not change the question. I asked about Holly Pass. Okay, but we get away from Lerner. I ask about Holly.
Okay, no, but my point is that we provide, to the extent we can provide the full story, your point, then it's a lot easier to know, and you can disagree about it, but it's a lot better to know what the total picture is. So when you get to custodians, because the IG is now doing that, we don't know what the answer is, so it may be 10, it may be 20, it may be 5, it may be 25, I don't know, and at this point we aren't able to investigate that, and we're hoping the IG, when he completes his investigation, will conclude with the custodians as well.
Well, that's another source of contention about.
Anyway, it's part of the problem with doing this in dribs and drabs.
I understand.
And every day having a press release about some aspect of some interview.
Thank you for saying drips and drabs, because that is what this investigation, it seems like it has been ever since we started, and especially even from your comments and others, that every day we get drips and drabs, and the people are tired of it, this Congress is tired of it, and this is the problem we have, because I'm going to assume from your question, I'm an attorney as well, that that's a no. After all you said, you've not gathered all her emails, or that you don't know if you've gathered all their emails.
No, exactly right. I didn't mean to be evasive. We provided all of the emails that were determined to be relevant to the determination process. We have not yet provided all of her emails, because our first priority, agreed with this committee in March, was we would find all of Lois Lerner's emails.
So no. So the question, William Wilkins, same question. Yes or no?
Same answer. You've got all of his emails that are responsive to the investigation that started all of this.
Okay, but no to all. Jonathan Davis, same question.
Again, you've got all of his.
No. I mean, because if this one, all is all. I mean, we had this conversation 3 months ago.
And as I said in March, we're happy to keep working with you to figure out what your next priority is. Obviously, thanks to the system, we can't produce it all at once. We've actually produced a lot of stuff, and it takes us a long time. Part of the background in the June 13th public report was to try to explain why, with our system, it takes so long to produce this stuff. We should not have to spend $18 million. We should have a better system. There's no doubt about that.
I don't disagree. And the question I have there is that, you know, is we need them all, and in the sense of, you know, the clarification issue here, and we just not got that. I do have one quick. I want to go back to something that was asked a lot earlier, and it was, I believe, from my friend from South Carolina. He said, we confirmed. And you said, I don't know who told me. And I've sat through, this will be my third, I guess, with you listening, and there's been a lot of meetings in which you were told information, but you don't remember who was in the meeting. Or you don't know who told you that. And it hit me as I was sitting here. Maybe there were multiple people in the room, and you're not sure who said it first, or who told you first. So I'm going to ask it differently. I don't want to know who told you first or last. I'm not being specific in that nature. I want to know who was in the room when you were told that we have confirmed all that. Who was, I mean, and surely you're a very bright individual. You would know at least who was in the room.
I have 12 meetings a day on average.
I do as well. I know most of the ones in the meeting, especially when it's senior staff on something of this nature.
And those meetings average probably 8 to 10 people, so I cannot tell you about any meeting who was actually in the room, but I can tell you who was likely in the room, and that is the people who have been working on the production with your staff. Obviously, my counselor was in the room. Probably my chief of staff was in the room, but I can't tell you, and I don't recall because it wasn't significant at the time, who else was in the room. We were reviewing the document.
It was significant at the time that you may have lost email. That was not a significant meeting?
The issue here was whether we could confirm. Your question was whether we could confirm.
Confirm, even, okay, but you're dealing in a bigger issue. I said, is that not significant?
This entire issue is significant, but I'm actually running an agency that has to deal with filing seasons. We have overseas voluntary disclosure programs. We have voluntary tax return programs we've been putting out. We've been simplifying for small charitable organizations.
And look, I understand that, and that is a great diversion to what we're asking right here. And I get that the IRS has other issues, but I also get that the American people, even over years of making fun and doing everything else that unfortunately the IRS has had in the past, it's not now just the fact that they don't like the IRS because they take, you know, they have to send their money in. They're now where there is an issue, both party line irregardless, they're not sure about the IRS because they don't trust the IRS anymore. Right. And when that is an issue, everything should be focused on that. And this is the question that makes it just completely implausible on we keep getting dribs and drabs. I appreciate what you said on dribs and drabs because that's the problem we have right now. And that's,
Gentleman's time expired.
Right. Could I just make one point clear, and that is nobody has a greater interest of getting you all the information you need and getting closure on this than I do and the people at the IRS. If we could conclude one of these 6 investigations, find out what the determination of facts are and the recommendations are, we're delighted to take those recommendations. We've accepted all of the Inspector General's recommendations. The last thing in the world that benefits us is to have this go on any longer than necessary. So whatever we can do, as fast as we can produce documents. The relevance of the 960,000 pages isn't that a big amount. It takes a lot of time to get all that done in our system.
The one thing we will agree upon is getting to the end of this is the end result so that we can move on this and the people can restore the trust in a government agency in which they need to have trust that they don't have now.
The gentleman's time has expired. I'm going to recognize the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
This is round 4?
No. This when people yielded me time under our arcane rules, that doesn't count.
Okay.
But I'll be brief. Commissioner, we have a history, and I want to make sure I get the history straight today because it does matter for this committee. You constantly talk about this agreement and discovery and so on. Were you aware that we considered that the IRS was stonewalling us and giving us information we didn't want and giving it to us in an order we didn't like it in the months of May, June, and July of 2013?
I was not aware of that.
Well, we have a number of letters basically showing our dissatisfaction, including what we now know to be erroneous information, misleading information that would imply that progressives were being targeted, the false narrative that continues to be used at times. On May 22, 2013, Lois Lerner took the Fifth. Shortly after that, she became a person of extreme interest for this committee because, in fact, she had made statements outside of her assertion of the Fifth that she broke no rules, she broke no regulations. She additionally authenticated earlier testimony and statements. Again, after she took the Fifth, she then went back on the record. So under oath, she had made a number of statements. As we began investigating, we became very aware that Lois Lerner was an active participant in Washington of targeting conservatives. In addition, in evaluating her history, we became very aware that she did not like conservatives, and she had that sort of predisposition. Plus, her public speeches made it very clear that on behalf of the President, quote, they want us to fix this, and certainly the President had been the outgoing spokesperson against Citizens United, that we had every reason to focus our investigation on her as the hub in a hub-and-spoke system of deliberately targeting conservatives for their values. Therefore, I issued, if the ranking member were here, he'd call it unilateral, but pursuant to the committee rules, I issued a subpoena and made it very clear that our first priority was to have all of Lois Lerner's emails and that was the priority. Were you aware of that?
I'm aware of that subpoena, yes.
And you were aware that that was our goal?
You have 8 items on that subpoena, and that's at the top of the list.
Very good. Therefore, when we interviewed Thomas Kean, and we asked him, so is it fair to say this subpoena had no, and this is the subpoena of August 2nd, this subpoena had no impact on the process that you were following or the documents that you were reviewing? That was our question. His answer, it didn't impact our production process. That's correct. Question, did it have any impact on which documents were chosen to review? Answer, no. Additionally, throughout that transcribed interview, what we discovered was that you all met, had a discussion, if you will, and decided that you were not going to prioritize any aspect of delivery of Lois Lerner's documents, even though she had taken the Fifth before this committee, even though she clearly had public statements, and she had been a person who had already unlawfully leaked, by planting a question, the outcome of an IRS a TIGTA investigation. All of that is undeniable. Why in the world should the American people believe that you are cooperating with us when I issue a subpoena, our committee makes it clear in multiple letters that these are our priorities, and now we have sworn testimony or testimony under penalty of perjury, that you didn't make any changes. You basically continued business as usual, which was delivering us based on, you call it mutually agreed, but they were your criteria primarily as to search terms, and never disclosed to us that those search terms were searching but a small portion of what should have been the entire database. Do you have an answer for that?
Well, I wasn't there. My understanding is there are 5 other investigations that are now going on and were going on then. That there were a wide range of requests for documents from Senate Finance Committee, Ways and Means, Permanent Subcommittee, as well as—
Did any of them issue binding subpoenas?
And I don't think anyone else had a binding subpoena. My understanding, and I wasn't there, was that—
But after February 2014, we issued another subpoena. Did anything change then?
At that point, we were, as I've testified before, we began to pull the rest of Lois Lerner's emails. We started with the analysis of the emails already produced. And that's where it was discovered that there were fewer emails in the 2011 period. We completed one of the priorities at that time, though, competing priorities, was to complete the production of the determination documents that everybody was interested in. There was kind of I gather, a process by which, with all of the conflicting questions, to try to respond to documents that met as many of the requests as possible. And most of the requests certainly for Finance, and at that time Ways and Means, were for documents around the determination process. That was completed, and then since that time, the full court press has been to produce all of Lois Lerner's emails, for whether in her account or any other account.
Thank you. Earlier on, I asked you for a discovery process of who was looking for when throughout a timeline, and your assistant took it in very copious notes there. I want to just add one clarification to that process. Obviously, we're interested in what you did during subpoenas, but we're getting that. You have delivered some, I guess we're looking at an exorbitant number of documents that you constantly and many people constantly cite. What we don't understand, that I think the committee has an absolute obligation to understand, is in this process of what you looked and where you looked, understanding the sources that this has come from. Because we're a committee of oversight and reform. We're a committee that has an obligation to see that you spend the American people's money properly. It appears from this side of the dais as though the process is very fragmented, that in fact you're looking sort of under cookie jars, to use an expression of my youth, that you're providing large amounts of data from certain periods that, based on a 6-month backup and a very small server capacity, wouldn't exist. So that means that they probably came from other places. And we need to understand all the places they came from, where you went. You've sent us, in many cases, hugely redundant emails. In other words, same emails can come from multiple places. Understanding that so that we can figure out how to prevent it in the future is important, because this is not the last time that a Federal judge, an IG, or a congressional committee is going to want to know details. I think we can all agree to that. Just as corporate America receives countless subpoenas for document production, so much so that they develop software explicitly to do these kinds of searches, and retention policies for that reason. Can we have your agreement that we'll receive some accounting of how that happens?
Yes. And we'd be glad to talk further with your staff to make sure we give you exactly what you need. But we did, you're exactly right. We looked in the logical places, and I understand we looked under every cookie jar. We actually were dedicated to making sure that we found every existent Lois Lerner email on her account or anybody else's, so that we would be able to say, these are all the Lois Lerner emails we have, and that's led to 67,000.
And I will make a rather unusual request in this case. We're more than happy to have a small group briefing meeting, bipartisan meeting, with the individuals who have been involved in this, so that, separate from the investigation, which is important and ongoing, the question of efficiency, the cost effect of fragmented data, the cost effect of having, and I held it up several other times, individual drives like this that people have, notebooks that have been taken offline, all the other things that I suspect are one of the reasons this has become so expensive and difficult. That meeting is not exactly on course with this investigation, but it is separately a question from a standpoint of the management of the $82 billion worth of funds that government spends, to see if in fact policy changes with OMB and others should be instituted and funding allocated so that this kind of fragmentation doesn't happen in the future. So as one person who's worked in private America to another, that's something that your briefing can be informal, off the record, doesn't have to be definitive, but our committee, I think, really has to have an understanding so we can be part of policy formation, because what I know about how corporate America does it and what I'm beginning to glean you have to do are very different.
They are very different. As I've said, I asked that question some time ago, that we should not have to spend $18 million and this amount of time responding to document and email requests. It's clear that it's there. But I think if we could kind of get two birds with one stone, we could, as you say, have that briefing that would answer your questions about how did this discovery process go, and then what are the problems with that going forward, because it is my understanding that there has been a tremendous amount of effort made to make sure that we found every document responsive to the committee. It is a lengthy process. Again, the June 13th report starts out trying to explain to all of the investigators what the process is and why it is so anachronistic and so difficult. And I agree with you totally. Going forward, it would certainly help all of us if we had a more efficient system for preserving and finding documents and emails.
Thank you, Commissioner. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and that concludes our hearing today. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, and the hearing is adjourned.